Hi guys, and welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. So today guys, I am going to be reviewing Arm of the Sphinx, Book 2 of the Books of Babel series, sequel to Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. Guys, I do not know how to praise this series more than I already am. The fact that this series is not on everyone's lips is just bizarre to me because it is just so good. It's so good, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna like this second one as much as I liked the first one, but I did. It's just as good as the first one. Now, before I start talking about this, please understand that if you have not read Senlin Ascends, this spoils the circumstances at the end of Senlin Ascends. It's not like it's some big twist or anything, but the circumstances do change from the first book to the second book. So if you haven't read that, and if you really care about that, then I'm gonna spoil that. It's not really all that interesting. The journey is much more interesting than where they end up. So it's not that big of a spoiler, but it is going to spoil what is on the back of the book of the second one. Now, just as a refresher, the first book, Senlin Ascends, is about Thomas Senlin, who is this newlywed headmaster who has come to the Tower of Babel on honeymoon with his wife. And the Tower of Babel is just this enormous tower in the middle of a desert, and it's just this testament to human ingenuity and human achievement. And inside are these individual, each floor is what's called a ringdom, and each one is unique and bizarre, and each one just has some kind of different thing going on with it. And within hours of arriving at the tower, Senlin and his wife get separated, and so that first story is about Senlin trying to find his wife, and how the tower changes him, and how the tower changes those around him. And it was so good. I love that book. I gave it 5 stars, a superb book easily. Now, when I started the second one, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it as much because I didn't really know where Senlin had to go. His character arc and growth in that first book was so good that I wasn't really sure where it had to go from there. But what Bancroft has done instead is where the first book was entirely from Senlin's perspective. It was Senlin's story. Well, now we've expanded from that single POV to a multi-POV from not just Senlin, but also the point of views of his friends and crewmates. So it's not just Senlin, but also Adam, Valletta, Edith, and Irene. And guys, these 5 characters, these 5 friends have to be one of the best examples of ragtag heroes, found family, just these strangers thrown together and trying to survive that I've ever read. They're so good. Everything about them is just so good. And while that first story was just a much more intimate tale of Senlin trying to find his wife, well, Senlin and his crew now, in Arm of the Sphinx, it's just much larger, and it felt much more like the first book of like an epic fantasy where it's setting up something much larger. We learn much more about the origins of the tower and who is running the tower and who built the tower and the purpose of the ringdoms and what's going on in each of the ringdoms. So setting up this much larger scale story while at the same time asking as many questions as it is answering. And so at the beginning, I didn't really like this book quite as much because I like Senlin. Senlin is my favorite character, and even in this one, he's my favorite of all of them. But the fact that Bancroft gave us a POV from all of the other characters lets us get to know them really, really well. And by the end, I liked this book just as much as the first one, though they are completely different kind of stories, really. It's a much bigger story compared to the intimate tale of the first one. So the main plot of the second one is Senlin and his friends are now air pirates. They stole a ship at the end of the first one, so now they're air pirates, and desperation on trying to find his wife ends up with them turning to this mysterious, mythical, legendary, may exist, may not, being called the Sphinx, who is apparently this hyper-intelligent being that is related to like the inner workings of the tower, and only Edith has had any contact with the Sphinx, so no one else even knows if he's real, and so that's the plot. There's some stuff that happens before that forces them to become desperate to go see the Sphinx, but that is the plot in general. But it's not so much the plot in this one. There's not a ton of forward movement in this. It's not the plot that's the best about this book. It's these characters. Guys, these characters are so real and so life-breathed and so three-dimensional and have realistic motivations and realistic reactions to things and real human emotions. I'm not sure I've seen better drawn characters. These guys are 100% real people in extraordinary circumstances, which is what my theater professor always told me that theater was. It's ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. And that's what these guys are. They're not superheroes. They all have differing kind of abilities and strengths, but they all have weaknesses as well. All of them. We have Senlin, who is no longer just searching for his wife. He now has to deal with the responsibility of captaining the ship and being in charge of his friends. Like, he has to balance his desire to find his wife with the amount of danger he is putting his friends in. They are on this journey with him because they believe in him. He has shown them it is possible to be hopeful in the tower. It is possible to be something more than what they are within the tower, where the tower has really kind of broken everybody down and everyone is just out for themselves. That's how Senlin was able to get the jump on the antagonist from the first one, is that he played their nature against them, is in the fact that they were always going to look out for themselves and they weren't going to think about other people. And so Senlin has kind of showed them a sign of humanity that they thought was lost in the tower. And so he has to look out for the interests of his crew. He also has to balance his desire to reunite with his wife and his devotion to his wife, whom he hasn't seen in over a year. He has to balance that with the very real kind of affection that he feels for some of the women in his direct surroundings. He's spending much more time with these other women and is developing just really complicated feelings for them, but is still devoted to and feeling responsible for his wife. And so that is handled in just such a real way, where he's been away from his wife for a year, but he is a human who has just this stirring of these feelings. It's just handled in a really complicated, real human way, where ordinarily in like a normal fantasy book, if, you know, the guy's, he's not around his wife or whoever he's with, and he's with these other women, he's just gonna be like, he's just gonna forget about that, and he's gonna lose his head, and something's gonna happen, he's gonna end up sleeping with these other women. And you've seen that 100 times in any fantasy book. That's just how it happens. Not so here. It's handled much more complexly and with much more nuance. The rest of these characters, they have real emotions, and like friends in these really heightened circumstances where they're in danger and they're cooped up together, they get angry at each other, they have moments of mistrust, they lose their cool at each other, they yell, they call people out for being hypocrites, and they fight. But just like real friends, it doesn't create this huge schism. Like, they get over it and they apologize, which, oh my goodness, have you ever seen that? They apologize and they talk about their feelings, and they have introspective moments where they examine why they're acting the way they are, and all of their feelings are just really complex for each other, but they feel like this real family, this real group of friends. If you have a group of friends, and if you don't, I'm sorry, but if you do, you know what it's like, the ebbing and flowing of being irritated with this friend this month, and you're irritated with the other friend that month, and you have disagreements and arguments, but it doesn't change the fact that at the core, you guys are friends. 3 of the 5 crew members are women, and these are strong female characters. All 3 of them are really different in their strengths and in how they act, but yet they're all really strong in their own way, while avoiding the stereotypical fantasy trope of like, look how amazing I am, I don't need help from anybody because I'm this BA female and I'm not like other female characters. He avoids that completely, while still giving them strength and power, but also weaknesses and femininity. Like, they're just really complete, well done female characters. Some of the best that I've seen. This is on par with what was one of my favorite female characters before, Winter from Django Wexler's Shadow campaigns. That is just such a really well-written, well-realized, strong female protagonist from that. If you haven't read the Shadow campaigns, read them. Winter, she's a soldier and becomes an officer. She's just really well written. And these characters are just as good. I see everyone talking about, oh, they're such character readers. They really like really great characters. More people need to be talking about these books, because the character work in this, Bancroft has just created living, breathing humans that we're just kind of a fly on the wall watching them. I mean, he avoids standard tropes that we would see with human behavior. There's one part of the book, two of the characters are talking about a third character, and they're talking negatively about them and saying that they're kind of irresponsible and they can't be counted on. But then as they talk, they come to realize that no, that's just the way they are. They just express it differently. They are responsible. They just have this independent streak, and they end up talking about how much they like that person and how integral they are to the group. Well, switch to the third character they were talking about. That character is later crawling through a vent, and they hear through the vent those two characters talking about them. And they hear, of course, because we've all seen this movie, they hear those two characters talking about them, about how they're irresponsible and they can't be counted on and everything. And any other book would have the third character crawl away and just have this resentment towards those two characters, and it would just manufacture this conflict that didn't really need to be there. But Bancroft turns that on its head and has that third character, as they're about to crawl away, be like, oh wait, I hear that they're still talking. And so stays for the rest of the conversation, where they hear the part where they talk about how they do like the third character and how they are responsible and they can count on them. And they just kind of express it in a different way. And so that third character in their head are like, man, I can't believe that I was going to believe that they thought so little of me. And so rather than being ticked at them, they're introspective about themselves and worry about their own motivations, about how they were about to react irrationally to what they were saying. And that is just so good and mature and adult. And I just love the way that's handled, because you know that miscommunication trope anywhere else would have just manufactured conflict. He deals with such human issues. I have never before in a fantasy book seen an author deal with a woman getting older and going through menopause. And I know that's just what you want to see in every fantasy book. That's what every fantasy book you've been reading up to this point is lacking. Someone going through menopause. But it's not menopause in itself. It's because I'm not the kind of person who needs to see every time a character uses the bathroom or everything they're going to eat. But what it does is it shows this real human relatable thing as this character is getting older and can't do all the physical things they used to be able to do. And they're starting to feel kind of different ways than they felt before, and having them come to terms with their body is changing and having them come to accept these new feelings and the new limitations of their body. It's just a really sweet, intimate moment with this otherwise really hard-boiled, tough character that is used to breaking people's skulls and is dealing with something just so vulnerable. And that is just so indicative of what he does. These characters are vulnerable. It's that vulnerability that makes them relatable. Because at its core, the journey that they're all on, it's not about the journey to see the Sphinx or even the journey to find Senlin's wife. It is a story about identity. In the first book, each one of them were under these kind of oppressive circumstances. They knew who they were. They knew what was expected of them. For example, in the case of the woman I was just talking about, her job was to obey orders, to enforce, the kind of gangster law, to break heads when she needed to, and that's it. But here, all of the characters have kind of been freed from that oppression, and so it's about them exploring and embracing their new identities. And they're scared a lot of the times because they're previous life, while oppressed, was certainty. They had certainty in that. And now, with these new kind of feelings of liberation and freedom, they're experiencing things they hadn't experienced before, and that makes them nervous and afraid and vulnerable. It asks the question, what part of our character is constant and what is a product of our circumstances? Can our core character change when a different set of circumstances arises? And it's just so well done. It's so brilliant. And if you've made it this far in the video, I hope that that speaks to you and that you'll go pick up these books and you can see for yourself just how well these characters are written. I mean, this is just like a master class in any aspiring writers should look at how well it's done here in Arm of the Sphinx specifically, even more so than in Senlin Ascends, on how to write realistic, three-dimensional, believable characters. So now that I'm done gushing about the characters, the other convention that Bancroft continues to use from the first one is pitting our expectations and the expectation of the characters against the reality of the situation. He is just really, really adept at creating these expectations that we have from reading books, but it never actually pans out the way we think it is going to. It creates this kind of culture of uneasiness and deception. And it was the same way in the first one. In the first one, I had no idea who I could trust and who was going to betray who. And that kind of continues here. He shows us that the gilded veneer or facade, underneath it, it's just, he shows us the black cruelty and harsh reality of what lurks behind this kind of whimsical facade. And so this culture of deceit is just so prevalent that you're always kind of uneasy. Like anytime anything's presented, you don't know if you can trust it. In fact, there's one part in the book where I thought for sure that something was going to happen because he's just so good at laying down clues out in the open, and it just comes back later out of nowhere. It just was kind of hidden in the prose. And I saw something, and I thought for sure that the last third of the book that one thing was going to take place, and I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it never did. But because he just creates this kind of unbelievability and everything is not what it seems on the surface, I was just uneasy the whole time, expecting one thing to happen while other things were taking place. There's one time where when the curtains pulled back, I just felt like physical revulsion just because of how awful and how cruel and ugly what was beneath the surface was. And the characters feel this too. They just never get a break, and this is what creates this tension. They expect certain things to happen, and at some point they expect their efforts to pay off, but the tower is just so merciless and so cruel that they can't even allow themselves to get their hopes up, because they just know the tower's just gonna dash it against the rocks. So the last character I'm gonna talk about is where most of the action kind of revolves around, and that's the mysterious Sphinx. The Sphinx is just such an awesome character. This is where this book takes a hard left into steampunk, where there were kind of steampunk elements in the first book. This book has so many machines and so much clockwork, and it's just so cool. If you like steampunk, I always wonder, like, when is steampunk gonna have its big breakout book? Because most steampunk books tend to be not very good because they're so focused on the steampunk setting and how awesome it is, and it is awesome, that it just doesn't really tell a compelling story or have really good characters. Well, Arm of the Sphinx is the book that should be changing that, because it is very steampunk, so many machines, so much steam, so much clockwork animals, clockwork like kind of automaton creation things. It's just so cool, and it's all surrounding the Sphinx, and he's just such a mysterious character that and you don't trust him at all because he's just this super genius. And watching him and Senlin, who really is like the most intelligent character of the crew, watching them match wits and see just how outwitted Senlin is just really, really a treat to read. The ending of this book, the last page of this book, I mean, weird stuff happens, but the last page of this book, I was like, what is happening here? I was just floored. I audibly was like, what? And I just had all the feels, and oh my goodness, like, I have to read The Hod King soon. The ending was just so, I don't know. Read the book. It's the last page. It's the last stinking page. Everything about this book isn't perfect. One big kind of annoyance is, if you've read it, you know what it is, but Senlin has a malady. Senlin has something kind of, he has an issue through almost the entire length of this book that is really kind of off-putting and annoying. I've talked about this with Samwise, and that made him like Senlin a little less in this book, and I completely understand. It's kind of annoying. In addition, I don't love animal sidekicks. I don't love humorous animal sidekicks, especially the scurrying kind, because scurrying animals, you know that at some point, if a little scurrying animal sidekick is able to scurry, at some point it will scurry off and the person will follow it, and, you know, consequences will arise from the ill-timed scurrying that came from said scurrying little creature. So I don't really love that. There is a creature that scurries in this one, and I'm not a huge fan of animal sidekicks just in general, because again, they tend to be of the scurrying variety. I don't know why I'm obsessed with talking about scurrying animals, but I mean, aren't they? Like, no one ever has like a dog in anything. You know, dogs don't scurry, and it's always some small thing that's gonna run away and cause issues. Anyway, there you go. There are some decisions that the characters make toward the end. There's one that Senlin makes specifically that I don't like, but that is just because of how I feel about the character. And anyway, there's not really a way to explain it, but sometimes they do things that I don't like, but that's not Bancroft's fault. Like, it's okay. I can not like what happened. That doesn't make it a worse book. But I just don't like a decision that is made toward the end just because I'm like, come on. But, you know, there it is. When there's like a big mystery kind of built up, and it's just, it can go either way, and you're just like speculating and making theories, there is always the risk of just being kind of disappointed when the curtain is pulled back. In fact, I'm not sure anyone can ever be happy when there's just a big kind of mystery built up. And so there's a little bit of that here. When the curtain is pulled back a little, what I saw behind the curtain initially was kind of disappointing, because it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And that was a little disappointing. It grew on me, and I was kind of fine afterwards. But there is a little bit of that to where I didn't immediately love what I saw behind the veil of the mystery. But that, again, that's a me problem. Guys, I love this book. On the Kingfin approval system, this is a superb book, 100%. On this, out of 5 stars, easily a 5-star book. These books are so good, and I cannot wait to read The Hod King, and then the 4th book comes out in April. If you haven't read these books, I do understand that they're not for everyone, and it's hard to describe why. They are odd and whimsical at times, so they aren't for everybody. But I think that everyone should at least give it a shot. If you've read Senlin Ascends and have not yet moved on to Arm of the Sphinx, what is wrong with you? Anyway, if you've read these books, let me know in the comments and let's have a conversation. What did you like about this book? Who's your favorite character in this book? What are the things you didn't like? If you're going to talk about spoilers, make sure to put spoiler tags so that, you don't ruin it for anybody else. But guys, thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you next time.